Hello everyone, welcome from the comfort of my bed, where we are now going to do a bunch of eyeshadow palette decluttering. We have Lisa, our assistant, and we also have a bunch of eyeshadow palettes that I would like to go through today and be relatively, cutthroat in terms of what I'm going to keep and what I'm going to get rid of. Now, just so it's clear for everyone, this right here is not getting decluttered. This is my Pat McGrath Shrine Corner. I have all of my Pat McGrath Mothership palettes, a bunch of my quads, some of my sixpence. You're going to also see some of my sixpence coming back in here. Needless to say, I'm not cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs, so I'm not going to be decluttering any of my Pat McGrath palettes. Although, I do have to mention that I did declutter one of her newest quads. If you've seen my review of the two newest quads that came out for the holiday collection, the Deep Space Divinity and the Bronze Borealis, I did declutter Deep Space Divinity. It went to someone who is enjoying it much more than I was, so I'm really happy about that. But I did actually, the impossible happened. I did declutter a palette from Pat McGrath Labs. I still have the Bronze Borealis quad and I'm going to keep it for the time being, although it is a very high chance I'm going to give it to my mom-in-law because I did her makeup with that quad recently and she seemed to enjoy it quite a bit. We have a lot to go through, so I'm just going to now point you downwards and we're going to go through a bunch of palettes and see what gets to stay and what gets to go. I hope you all don't mind that we're going to be doing this so chill here on my bed instead of a proper desk and an overhead setup like all the professional YouTubers are doing it. But I feel like it's a bonus that you get to enjoy Lisa grooming herself in the background, so there's that. Okay, so let's get started with a little container here, which is going to be quite easy because most of what's in here is going to stay. Starting off with my Natasha Denona gold palette. By the way, I'm not going to be swatching anything because I don't want to be here for 50 years. My Natasha Denona gold palette has a special place in my heart because it was my first Natasha Denona palette. It was a present from my beautiful friend Bia, and I actually really enjoy this color story and this eyeshadow palette. Oh, there you go, the bonus is now ×2 because Mona is here as well. I really enjoy the formulas in here. I think in terms of textures, this is one of Natasha's best eyeshadow palettes, and I have to say, based on my experience with her palettes so far, Natasha seems to do monochromatic eyeshadow palettes really, really well. Speaking of monochromatic, another palette that I really enjoy from her that is not going to be going anywhere is her bronze palette. I really love this palette. Again, I really enjoy the undertones of the eyeshadows in here, the formulas, the different textures, because just like with the gold palette, you do get some variety in terms of the textures, although I have to say the gold palette has somewhat more interesting textures compared even to the bronze palette. Another beautiful monochromatic story from Natasha Denona that I am keeping is the Glam palette. Now, the Glam palette suffers a little bit from the lack of interesting textures. These are just your basic like mattes, and they're not even like the cream to powder mattes, and your basic like metallic shimmery formula, so there's absolutely nothing interesting in here in terms of textures. But this is the only cool toned leaning neutral eyeshadow palette that I have, and I do actually quite like it because I always like the looks that I come up with. There's no fuss, there's no drama, it's just straightforward cool toned neutral eye looks, and I do really enjoy this, especially in the winter months. Another gorgeous new addition to my collection from Natasha Denona is this Face and Eye Glam palette. I have mine in the shade Dark. I recently demoed this palette. This is again a relatively, well, not relatively, it's a straight up monochromatic eyeshadow color story from her. But aside from the 5 eyeshadows here on the bottom, you also do get to face powder, well, not face powders, face products. You get this beautiful cream blush and this gorgeous highlighter. And while I do think that the real standouts for me are the face products, I have to say the eyeshadows are actually pretty nice, especially the two shimmer formulas, and especially this eyeshadow over here. This is a beautiful eyeshadow. I really, really like this. It's so unique, it's so dimensional, and I really enjoy the texture and the formula of this because it reminds me of a formula that is present in the gold palette that I do not have in either the bronze or the glam. And I think she should make this formula and put it in her eyeshadow palette more often. Okay, let's do these guys real quick. We have the Dark Star 6 pan from Pat McGrath. Opulence 2018 obviously gets to stay. I love this. Nothing from Pat McGrath is leaving, but since these are here, let me just quickly show them to you. This is my Metamorphosis 6 pen, which also gets to stay, of course. Then we have the last Opulence 6 pen. This is the... what's this one called again? This is the Bronze Temptation 6 pen, which I also adore. Gets to stay. And last but not least, we have one of her original 6 pens. This is the Lovey and Rose, which looks like this. I think most of these 6 pens have not really been available for quite some time because they are relatively old. Some of these eyeshadows have come back into other palettes, others have not, but I really love them, so of course they get to stay. So next let's tackle some Juvia's Place palettes. Juvia's Place as a brand was one of my favorite indie brands to discover in 2018 because I think the aesthetic of their packaging is really beautiful. I liked the formulas, I liked the color stories, and for a really long time I loved all of my Juvia's Place eyeshadow palettes and I used them a lot. But as you know, eyeshadow formulas have evolved. I think even Juvia's Place have evolved in terms of their formulas, which is why I am probably going to declutter a couple of these palettes. I haven't really been purchasing from them in the past year because I haven't really enjoyed any of their color stories enough, and because I have so much Natasha Denona and Pat McGrath, I just feel like it doesn't get any better, so why would I bother buying anything else? I'm just past the phase where I want to purchase a lot of different brands in order to try, because I feel like I've already found my tried and trues, and you have seen on my channel this past year that I keep going back to my Pat McGrath palettes and my Natasha Denona palettes, so I don't even know why I would bother with many other brands. So let's talk about the taupes, which was my latest purchase from Juvia's Place. I purchased this in the summer of last year and I ended up regretting my purchase, if I'm being honest, because this is not a great quality eyeshadow palette. I have shadows here that are better quality than what's in this 6 pen. Theoretically, I love this because the color story is really beautiful, but in practice, the mattes are extremely poor quality. They're this very thin formula which doesn't build and kind of like wipes itself away as you blend it. It's quite terrible. This shade has absolutely no depth to it, even though it looks like it's a deep shade. The standout shade in this palette is this beautiful dimensional shimmer metallic flaky sort of shade over here, but it is not worth for me to keep the whole eyeshadow palette just for that one shade. And I'm also not the kind of person who would mutilate this whole palette to get this specific eyeshadow out and then pass the rest to someone else. I would just pass the whole thing as it is to somebody else if they're going to enjoy it. So let's start making a little declutter pile over here, and this is going to go first into my declutter pile. Now another palette that sadly is going to go into the declutter pile is the Afrique by Juvia's Place. I did purchase this in 2018, I think I was still pregnant when I bought it, so it must have been 2018. Theoretically, at the time, a very me eyeshadow palette because it's colorful, it has really beautiful pops of green and blue and orange and yellow, and actually the metallics in here are pretty fabulous quality, but as it is, I never reach for this eyeshadow palette. The colorful eyeshadows are not something that I use all that often these days, and the metallic shades, I have similar eyeshadows from Pat McGrath, so I'm never going to choose this above my Pat McGrath or Natasha Denona eyeshadows, which is why I never use this eyeshadow palette. So I think someone else might enjoy this a lot more than I will. So this is going to the declutter pile. Okay, here we have another eyeshadow palette from Juvia's Place that I am going to declutter. This is the Deuce palette. Now, I like this palette, but I've never really fell in love with it. And the reason for that is I think I found out I'm just not a pastel kind of gal. I have enjoyed some of these eyeshadows a lot. This white to pink duochrome, I don't know whether you can see. Probably not. The pastel pink is really cute. The pastel mint green is really beautiful as well. They work so well as inner corner pops of color. This is a very interesting shade because it's like this sage green gray. As a whole, I almost never use this eyeshadow palette, and if I do, it is for the mint green shade. So I think it's time for this eyeshadow palette to go. Here is one that is probably going to surprise a lot of you. This is the Nubian 2 palette. The Nubian 2 palette is a beautiful eyeshadow palette. I like the quality of the eyeshadows in here. I like the tones. I like how well they play together. This green here, the shade Egypt, is such an interesting and beautiful, beautiful tone. But as it is, again, I can create similar looks with my eyeshadow palettes from Pat and Natasha, and unfortunately, because of that reason, I just never reach for the Nubian 2 palette anymore. I don't think I've used this palette even once in the last year, so I'm going to give this to someone or I'm going to sell it. The gist is I'm going to rehome it and find it a better mama. Just as a side note here, I wanted to throw in, none of these are going to go into the bin unless they are super bad quality, expired, and I wouldn't like even dream of giving them to somebody else. They're either going to be given away to my friends and family or they're going to be sold. This is my favorite Juvia's Place palette. This is the Saharan 2, and the formulas in here, there is something really outstanding about the formulas that are present in here. You have these beautiful duochrome shades over here, these gorgeous metallics that are a little bit more like neutral peachy leaning for the summer. Then you have that stunning pop of blue. You have these beautiful matte shades over here that go really well with at least some of the neutrals in the palette. I still really enjoy this eyeshadow palette and I pull it on occasion, so this gets to stay. Another one that gets to stay is the Tribe by Juvia's Place. I really love what they did with the color story in this palette, because combining orange and green is one of my favorite like combination of eyeshadows ever, and I do really enjoy a lot of the eyeshadows that are present in here. This metallic neutral here, absolutely stunning. These two shades, beautiful. This shade here has a beautiful like grungy like poopy tone to it that is very unique in my collection. So I am definitely keeping these two palettes from Juvia's Place because they are my two favorites. The original, the one that started it all, the Magic palette by Juvia's Place, it is with a heavy heart that I have to say I think I'm going to declutter this eyeshadow palette, even though looking at it I still think I enjoy a lot of the eyeshadows in here. But unfortunately I have not used it in the past year, not even once. Pretty much everything in here is beautiful. The deep mattes, the metallics, the combination of the warm, neutral, pinky tones with the more like grungy, deep jewel tones. There is a beautiful duochrome in here. Overall, beautiful quality. I'm sad to part with this, but I think someone else will enjoy this more than I am, because like I said, I have not pulled it even once in the past year, so there's really no point for me to keep it. Let's quickly talk about this little dude over here. This is the nice Climax palette, which I'm obviously not going to declutter. I just purchased this year, and it is a palette that I have really been enjoying. Beautiful color story, very unique undertones, very unique combination of undertones, and pretty good formulas. Good job, NARS. Let's talk about these two. The Nabla Soul Blooming palette. This is so beautiful, from the packaging to the formulas in here to the actual color story, which is such a beautiful and interesting color story with those coral shades, those purplish shades, this beautiful flaky duochrome in here. But you know what? This is basically the less evolved sister of Utopian Dream. So as much as it pains me to say, because this is also the only Nabla eyeshadow palette that I have in my collection, I am going to declutter this because I will never pick this over the Utopian Dream palette, and to me the two basically have almost identical color stories. Now this one is a real throwback. I bought this early in 2018, like I said, when I was on my journey of purchasing eyeshadow palettes from a bunch of different indie brands. I was just coming from my loose indie eyeshadow phase, and I had just discovered like pressed indie eyeshadows and indie eyeshadow palettes, and this was one of the first ones that I bought. This is from a brand called Zurich Cosmetics, which doesn't even exist, and I don't really know whether I'm quite ready to part with this eyeshadow palette, and the reason for that is actually a few. I really like this corner over here with those like orangey tangerine colors. Not that I have picked it up in the past year, I have not used it even once, so I don't know why I'm keeping it. You know what, if I can find someone who wants this, I am going to get rid of it as well, because as much as I like those tangerine orange colors, am I really going to pick this up over Corrupt Copper from Pat McGrath? Unlikely. Now this is a very old palette. I've had this since 2014, and I purchased it from an indie brand called Lunatic Cosmetic Labs. And you can see the packaging is so incredibly interesting because it looks like a coffin, and when you open it, the mirror has a bad shape. But what I have come to realize is, first of all, these eyeshadows were incredibly crumbly. I don't know whether you can tell there. If I touch them, they will immediately start to become very powdery and crumble up. and I just never really used this eyeshadow palette. But most importantly, I realized that this is just not my aesthetic. It was never my aesthetic, it's never going to be my aesthetic. It's just time for me to stop pretending that I'm a goth kid. I never was, I never will be, this needs to go. This is an eyeshadow palette, by the way, that I don't think I'm actually going to give to someone. I think I might just throw it in the bin. Next we have this beautiful quad from Notoriously Morbid. This is their When the Wolf Bane Blooms. This was released several years ago. It was one of the first pressed eyeshadow palettes that Carrie released. Carrie is the owner of Notoriously Morbid, and I think you can already tell why I'm going to declutter this, because unfortunately the binder in these is starting to dry out and they're literally starting to crumble out of the pan. I'm not sure whether if I put binder the formula will remain the same, nor do I feel like fucking around with it, so this is just going to go. Here is one that is going to surprise the people who love this eyeshadow palette, not so much the people who have followed my channel, because I think you know that from the get-go I didn't quite get along with the color story of this palette. I don't know why, because theoretically it's beautiful and it contains a lot of the types of tones that I really enjoy, especially here in like the orangey, goldy and this beautiful olive green shade range. But for whatever reason I never fell in love with this eyeshadow palette like everybody else did, so I never use it. I've used it a handful of times since I bought it, and I know so many other people were so sad that they were never able to get their hands on this palette, so I think someone will really love having this eyeshadow palette in their collection finally. So Good Sport is finally going to leave the premises. Oh, let's talk about this one. This is the Naked Heat eyeshadow palette. When this palette was released, I was in love with it. I used it all the time. It was my favorite like neutral eyeshadow palette. I'm not sure whether you can tell what a gorgeous dip I already have in the shade Amber over here, this beautiful deep chocolate brown. I hesitated for a long time whether I really want to declutter this eyeshadow palette, but here is the ugly truth. If I have the bronze palette from Natasha Denona, am I really ever going to pick Naked Heat above that? Not ever. So unfortunately, Naked Heat has been, you know, outshined, outperformed, out-evolved by the Natasha Denona bronze palette. So I am going to give this away to someone, and I'm sure that someone amongst my family or friends will really enjoy having this. Let's go through some melt eyeshadow palettes. I only have 3 melt eyeshadow palettes, and 2 of them I'm definitely going to keep. This one is the Smoke Sessions eyeshadow palette, which is a gorgeous array of like cooler toned mint greens and warmer toned olive greens. I will be honest with you, I like this side of the palette a lot more than I not like but use this side of the palette, although I have to say the shade Mean Green is absolutely beautiful. It is such an impactful, gorgeous tone of green. Very shiny. These are beautiful formulas, beautiful tones. I'm definitely keeping Smoke Sessions. The same holds for the Rust palette, which was released last year, and I think it is such a gorgeous interpretation of like fall tones with that stunning pumpkin orange shade, this beautiful warm toned brown, this gorgeous chocolate brown. I still pull out for this palette every now and then. Are these my most favorite and most used eyeshadow palettes? No, but I do still occasionally reach for them, so I'm definitely going to keep both of these. Now this one on the other hand, Millennial Pinks, is an eyeshadow palette that makes me angry because I was so excited when they announced this eyeshadow palette, because theoretically it looked so beautiful and so interesting with these more like pinky corally red shades, and then the combination with the grayish like navy blue gray tones in it. Theoretically great, in practice a total fail. Especially the shimmers in this eyeshadow palette are a complete and utter failure. There's something wrong with them, and I can't quite tell you what's wrong with them, but I have not enjoyed this because of that. The mattes are fine, but the shimmers, which is what I like the most in an eyeshadow palette, are an epic failure, and I have been trying to declutter this eyeshadow palette already for over a year. I tried selling it and I could not. I think I have to lower the price in order to get rid of it, but I will eventually get rid of it because it makes me irrationally angry. Okay, let's talk about a bunch of random things over here. First of all, we have this shell of Makeup Addiction Cosmetics, which doesn't actually house any Makeup Addiction Cosmetics eyeshadows anymore, which is why I'm going to go through it really quickly. These are some of my JD Glow Galaxy eyeshadows. But speaking of Makeup Addiction Cosmetics, I still have this eyeshadow palette from them. This is the Meadow palette, which I think, except for this green shade, which was something else before, and I substituted it for one of the shades that was actually in here. This is really beautiful, and for the longest time I didn't want to get rid of it. I'm still really unsure whether I want to declutter it, but the matter of fact is I never use it. I never pull it out of my collection. I always think about using it, but I never actually do. These formulas are very comparable to Juvia's Place. Sorry, that's Nicole in the background. So to be honest with you, if I can find someone who is going to take this palette off of my hands, I gladly will pass it on to them. But if I don't find anyone to gift this to, I will probably keep it and try to use it every now and then myself, because I do actually really like. Okay, here is one that I am going to declutter. This is the Sassy Siennas, one of the quintets that was released by Dose of Colors a while back. Dose of Colors never really became one of the brands that I was super into, and even though I really like this quintet, I've gotten the impression that it leans a little bit too coral for my brown eyeshadow tone likings. This is a very convenient eyeshadow palette if you go traveling. You can just take this and a couple of like Colourpop Super Shock shadows and you're good to go, which is what I have done in the past, but I haven't really gone anywhere in the past 2 years, which is why I haven't used this eyeshadow palette in the past 2 years. It's just that between all of my Pat McGrath and Natasha Denona eyeshadows, I have all of these in there, so I don't ever reach for this quintet. So the Sassy Siennas is going to be decluttered as well. Let's talk about the only Anastasia palette that I have left. I will throw in here that I did earlier this year declutter Norvina and Prism. I gave Prism to one of my friends at work, and I sold Norvina because obviously I wasn't using them. The only one I have kept is Subculture, and I find it very difficult to part with Subculture because I think this eyeshadow palette is one of those that is going to go down in the history of makeup. You know, if they ever write the history of makeup, this is going to go down as one of the most unique and revolutionary color stories released at the time. This came out in the year of 2017, when people weren't really making very intriguing color stories, let alone something this exciting. So I am keeping this mostly out of nostalgia, and because I really enjoy this shade, this shade, this more like murky green over here. There are a couple of eyeshadows in here that I find really unique, which is why I don't want to part with this just yet, and because it's a little bit of a nostalgia item for me, and I have a really hard time parting with nostalgia items, which you're going to see becomes worse as we go through this declutter process. Then we have the Paleo palette from Clionadh Cosmetics. Oh my god, what an adventure to get this eyeshadow palette. First of all, I had to wait for it to be restocked. Then I pre-ordered it, then it took half a year for it to get here, and then I was disappointed when I received it. I like the idea behind this palette. Is completely handmade, in the sense that this is all like hand drawn, and I can already see actually that it's starting to acquire a little bit of damage. But the problem is that everyone was so over the moon with Clionadh eyeshadows and how beautiful and they are, and how impactful, and how duochromy and stuff. And then I got this eyeshadow palette and I was like, I've seen duochromes that are far, far better than the ones in here. Don't get me wrong, these are beautiful eyeshadows, beautiful metallic eyeshadows, but they fall a little bit flat for the price and the experience that I was promised. Overall, the color story I thought at the time was very interesting. Now it doesn't really make that much sense to me. This is one product, and actually just this whole brand, Clionadh, that I've always like really fallen for the hype, and I've never really gotten to the point where I have like my expectations never met reality, in the sense that for whatever reason people always hype up Clionadh products so much, and then when I get them I always feel like they're fine, they're really good, but they're not the outstanding products that people make them sound like they are. So I will keep this eyeshadow palette mostly because I can't think of anyone who would want it, and because I paid so much money for it and I waited for it for so long. And I think some of these metallic shades are still really beautiful and I might get use out of them. but it is one that I'm really on the fence with. I don't know if this is going to survive another declutter. Oh my god, you guys, I really need to go through this a little bit quicker. Here we have the Linda Hallberg Enchanted Secrets quad. This was incredibly expensive, and I have to say, in terms of formula, this is the closest you're going to get to like the VR shades. I think the VR shades, not the Blitz for sure, not the Astrals either. This is as close as you're going to get to the VR shades from Pat McGrath, and these are beautiful eyeshadows. But the thing is, when I compare them to the actual VR shades from Pat McGrath's formula is still superior, and what really irks me with this is this was very expensive, and I understand Linda Hallberg is indie brand and she makes her products in Europe, so that probably increases the costs tremendously, but this is so poorly packaged. This is just so cheap. She might as well have just sold these as individual like single eyeshadows in their pans, and it might have been better than putting them in this extremely ugly, cheap feeling packaging. So I'm going to declutter this because I never pull out for this above my Pat McGrath Blitz VRs and Astrals, and I think someone else might enjoy this a lot more than I am. So I'm going to be decluttering this. Okay, we are almost at the end of the line, you guys. We're getting there. So first up we have the Urban Decay Gwen Stefani palette. This is an eyeshadow palette that I'm not going to be decluttering for sentimental reasons, because this is a nostalgia piece, not only in terms of makeup but also in terms of my relationship with Gwen Stefani, and No Doubt, which is such a high school throwback for me. I am going to keep this eyeshadow palette because I just cannot imagine the day that I will give this away to somebody else, and there are some, you know, pretty nifty neutrals in here. I really like this more like taupey, browny gray shade in the corner over here. I will reach for this eyeshadow palette specifically for this shade sometimes, so I'm not going to get rid of this one for sure. Then we have the Colourpop Just My Luck palette, which is one of their monochromatic... oh my goodness. Oh my goodness, they're so cute. And let's go back to the eyeshadows, if we can concentrate on that, please. We have the Just My Luck palette, a green eyeshadow palette from Colourpop. Colourpop does not make an outstanding eyeshadow formula. I don't really know why everyone is so up and, you know, excited about it. I'm not, it's fine. The reason I'm keeping this is because of this eyeshadow here in the very center of the palette. It is a gorgeous lime green, very impactful, very shimmery. Not quite ready to part with this one yet, so this one is going to stay. Then we have the Dark Room and Stilati collaboration with Jordan Liberty, which I did a review on several years ago. I bought this palette mainly to support Jordan Liberty because Stilati is not a brand that I have ever purchased from before or will ever purchase from in the future. In terms of quality, this eyeshadow palette is fine, but it's nothing to write home about. In terms of color story, I think it's a pretty solid color story. You get pretty much everything you will need to do basic looks with a little bit of like pops of color. I will keep it because I really like Jordan Liberty, but overall it's not an eyeshadow palette that I would miss if I ever got rid of. It's just something that I bought to support someone, and I almost never do that. This is the only instance that I've ever purchased a product simply to support someone in the makeup community, but I think Jordan is so incredibly talented, and he seems to be an incredibly nice person, so I really wanted to show my support, so I bought this palette. That's it. Okay, we have two throwbacks here from Too Faced, and you are going to probably find this surprising, but I am going to be keeping probably both of them. This is the Bonbons palette, which is the original like cool toned neutral eyeshadow palette, and I still reach for this. I still reach for these two mattes over here. Some of these shimmers are not the worst, and I like pairing them with some of my Colourpop Super Shock shadows, so I still think this is a pretty like useful palette in my collection, so I'm not going to get rid of it. And the same holds for the does it. Whew, and now I'm looking at this one, the Sweet Peach, and I don't know whether I have the heart to get rid of it because this comes with a story to it. I made my parents go and buy the last remaining of these palettes from Sephora in Bulgaria when this came out, because when this came out it caused so much uproar because it was limited edition, it sold out everywhere, you couldn't really get it, and then I sent my parents on a mission to get the very last one from Sephora in Bulgaria after they got a call that it's finally back and there is one remaining for me. So they went to get it, and then I had to wait a couple of months before I could have it, and there are still a couple of, like I said, useful neutrals in here, mid-tone neutrals that I can use. So I think I'm going to keep it because of that and because of how much trouble my parents went through to get this palette. Here we have a little eyeshadow. Is it even eyeshadow? It might be face powders. I don't know. This is the Watercolors Crystalline Face and Highlighter palette from Notoriously Morbid. This is old AF, and the reason I have kept this all these years is because of this shade over here, because when you swatch it, it becomes this beautiful iridescent gorgeous purpleness, and when you put this in your inner corner it just glows. And that is the only reason I'm still going to keep this, because I don't really have anything quite like this shade anywhere else. Can you see how beautiful that is? I just cannot get rid of it. Here we're going to get again into nostalgia territory and things that I'm not getting rid of because of that. The electric palette from Urban Decay reminds me of a trip that my husband and I took to Portugal, and me finally buying this palette after pining over it for years basically. I still pull this out sometimes to do like pops on my lower lash line or pops in my inner corners. So I am going to keep it because of that, but I'm mostly keeping this because of nostalgia, because what Urban Decay meant to me at the time, and because again this is another one that will go down in the history of makeup as one of the most, you know, innovative, revolutionary and groundbreaking color stories to come at the time of its release. And this packaging to this day remains gorgeous. And then the Mundus from Urban Decay, which contains the original Blitz VR and Astro shades. So to me, the Mundus formula from Urban Decay is the original like wet, super glittery, super glitzy eyeshadow formula on the market. I have loved this eyeshadow palette so very much. I still do use it from time to time, and I think some of these tones are still very interesting. I have loved this eyeshadow here, the shade Element. I love the green one. The blue one is super pretty. These two neutrals here are also very interesting tones. So overall, even though this cannot hold a candle to the original Blitz VR and Astro shades, I am going to keep it because I do use it occasionally, and again it is one of those beautiful nostalgia items in my collection from Urban Decay, from a time when I really enjoyed and looked forward to Urban Decay releases. And we're down to the last three, you guys, which are again going to be a little bit of nostalgia territory, but I'm going to do my best. So here we have the Sugarpill Feline Fancy little quad, which came out for Valentine's Day, I want to say 2017. This is really cute, and I for the longest time did not have the heart to part with it, especially because I really like this eyeshadow here. I don't know whether you can see, it is like a classic peachy pink gold duochrome in a beautiful satin formula that works so well like a one and done eyeshadow. But the truth is, even though I adore it, I never pull out for it, and it is not nostalgic enough for me to keep it. So I am going to give this to someone who I think might actually still get some use out of it. Let's not even for a second kid ourselves. I'm going to be keeping both of my Sugarpill quads, the original quads that they released in 2013 or something. So the two that I have are the Burning Heart, which is the like more fiery color story. I've gotten a really huge dent in the purple eyeshadow. I've really enjoyed all of these three mattes as well. And the same holds for the other quad from them, and that is the Heartbreaker quad, which is one that I love and cherish even more. This is more like a purpley green color story. This eyeshadow here, I've never been able to find anything that is quite like it, and they unfortunately discontinued this eyeshadow. This is the shade Acid Berry, which is a classic from Sugarpill. The reason I'm not getting rid of either of these is because they are nostalgia items for me. These remind me of the very beginning of my makeup journey. This one in particular, the Heartbreaker quad, was a present from my colleagues from my previous workplace when I finished my PhD. So these two are not going anywhere. Just like with the electric palette and the subculture palette, if I ever have like a museum kind of display in my house, these are going to go in there. So even if I never use them, even if they start to stink, I'm going to keep them because they mean a lot to me. So let me take this container and do our final count. So I am rehoming 14 eyeshadow palettes, and I am binning 2. So overall I have decluttered 16 eyeshadow palettes, and I don't actually know what the final count of my other eyeshadow palettes is, but like, who the fuck cares? The most important thing is that I have, you know, parted with some items that were difficult for me to part with because I have purchased them and I have used them with so much affection. But you know, formulas have evolved, my taste has evolved and changed, and these just don't really have any use in my collection, and they're not nostalgic enough for me to keep. So guys, that is all from us. Mona, Lisa and I are wishing you a good day, and thank you so much for spending the time with us. This video is going to be super long, I'm so sorry. See you in the next one. Bye!